The path to paradise begins in hell. Welcome to the Grind Over Chatter podcast with Acie. This podcast is for everyone out there who's on the grind for a better life. Greatness ain't about what you've done or achieved, it's about how you got there and how you stay on top. You're about to hear real stories from real hustlers who are putting in that work to crush it in their industries today. Together, we'll learn about the qualities and habits that it takes to achieve success at the highest level. Whether you're looking for a new hustle or a side hustle, we hope to inspire and provide you with the tools to take your grind to the next level. Y'all ready? Let's get this money. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the Grind Over Chatter podcast, episode 4. With me today is a dear friend who I haven't seen in quite a while, so this is a nice treat to catch up. We both went to college at Wilfrid Laurier University, but time has brought us both on two very separate paths. Luckily, due to social media, I've been able to keep a close eye on my buddy, but I've just been blown away at what I've been seeing from him. As if living and working in Japan for the last 9 years wasn't already cool enough, he was able to build a YouTube channel based on his passions and interests in the underground car culture of Japan and has amassed almost 150,000 subscribers and over 7.5 million views. Wow. My guest today, coming live from the land of the rising sun, more specifically Yokohama, Japan, Albo Agunday. How you doing, man? Welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me on, man. This is gonna be fun. I love doing these podcasts.
For sure, man. Me too. And it's so nice just to get a chance to catch up as well. So we both graduated around 2010. Tell me where your life went from there.
So after that, I decided to apply to a program called the JET program, which is basically, it stands for the Japan English. Oh man,
it's been a while.
Hang on, it's been a while. Yeah, Japan Exchange and Teaching Program.
Okay. And
basically, it's a Japanese government organization program where they take people from various different countries around the world and they basically put them into local schools, city halls, kindergartens, places like that to get them to get the communities to have more exposure to people from different countries, because a lot of towns in Japan are really, really remote, and a lot of people have never ever seen a foreigner. So I think one of the Japanese government's main aims with this program was to basically internationalize the people of Japan, and it's been going on for about 30 years. So I joined that program after we finished school, and I did it for 5 years, and then I did some other things for a couple years, and now I'm working a corporate job here around Tokyo, here in Yokohama.
So why Japan? Why'd you pick Japan?
I mean, growing up, I watched a lot of anime and watched a lot of Japanese dramas, and there was always like this mystique to Japan. There's always this, it's kind of similar, but there's so many elements that are completely different. So it always felt like a place I knew so well, but I had never been to. And I always was yearning to confirm for myself if those preconceptions that I had were actually realistic, if it was going to live up to this image I had built up for myself in my head. And, of course, I always wanted to go to Japan on vacation or to come here on a student exchange, but I never really had that opportunity. And I thought, okay, well, straight out of university, I have, at the time I was working at a bank, at TD Bank, and I was like, I could see where my life was going. If I stayed in that position, I could kind of look down the hall literally and see, okay, if I stay here, I'll get a promotion, I'll be further down the hall, and like maybe that like there'll be like a corner office in like 5 or 10 years.
You might get a window seat or something.
Right. And I saw that person and I was like, well, they seem to have an okay life, but it was kind of not what I wanted for myself. And I thought, okay, there's an opportunity here. This is a really interesting program. I did a lot of research about it. It seemed reputable. It didn't seem like a scam. It didn't seem like something I would regret. And I basically applied, and I tried to put together the best application possible. And somehow I got selected from all like the thousands of applicants. The overall intake rate is, I think, around 17% or something.
Hmm.
So it was quite fortunate for me to be able to get into it.
That's awesome, man. So when you first got there, did it live up to the mystique, as you mentioned?
Yeah, I mean, I'm gonna sound like a total weeaboo. So this is a word that people use to to disparage fans of anime. Uh, but you know what? Like for me, honestly, like living in Japan felt like I was living in a Studio Ghibli anime, or because especially because I was living out in the countryside of this area called Gunma,
Uh-huh.
which some people might know as the location, the setting of this other anime called Initial D.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, so like my life felt half like Studio Ghibli because it was in the mountains of Japan, surrounded by these lush rice fields and these rolling forests and beautiful azure blue skies. And at night I would hear like the screeching roar of like these like screeching tires and engines like kind of reverberating across the valley.
Mm-hmm.
And I was like, wow, this is like Initial D. Like I bet there's well, there was obviously people like doing car stuff, right?
Mm-hmm.
And when I would go for drives up the local, we call it toge, which means a mountain pass,
Mm-hmm.
up the local mountain pass to one of the schools that I would teach at. Um, the railings would be more and more damaged. Like as the year went on,
Mm.
they would get more and more and more damaged until suddenly they would be brand new. They would be replaced, and there would be like patches of burnt rubber, kind of like streaking across or down the road.
Mm-hmm.
And I was like, okay, this rubber is still fresh. Like, what is going on here, right?
Mm-hmm.
So for years, actually, for a couple of years, I kind of had assumed that the world of underground like drifting as it's shown in Initial D
Mm-hmm.
I was like, okay, this is probably just like an anime and this is just not a realistic depiction. But I always kind of thought, okay, there's something there. And over the years, I had more and more of an opportunity to kind of explore that world.
That's awesome, man. How were your first couple of days out in Japan, though, when you first moved out there? Did you have any culture shock or anything? Because you didn't speak the language when you got out there, did you?
Right. I mean, we had a couple weeks of like a crash course in basic Japanese.
Mm-hmm.
Of course, once you get on the ground, you've forgotten almost everything except where's the toilet and thank you and just a few basic phrases, right? So I couldn't really speak any Japanese. Fortunately for me, with the JET program, it was incredibly um, supportive. So
Mm-hmm.
there was like a very strong and large and robust support network. And so even my closest peers, there were a bunch of other we call each other we were called jets, and there were a lot of jets in my city. There was like a handful of us, maybe like
Mm-hmm.
five or six, and we lived in the same building. So whenever I had issues, I could go to my senpai, which is it means like senior,
Mm-hmm.
and they would always give me advice and they would take me around and show me like these different places and help me get a lay of the land and also help me get everything set up. And aside from that, I also had a um, what was it called, like a supervisor from the local board of education. And
Mm-hmm.
she was a really really wonderful woman. She spoke a little bit of English and she always did her best to help us and to make sure that we had what we needed to get set up and to get our life going. And I was really lucky because there was always that support structure and network there, which for other programs, might not be as robust or might not even exist. So I was really fortunate.
That's really cool, man. If comparing life from there to here, what was the hardest thing probably to adjust to over there?
I would say the hardest part was just being away from your friends and your family.
Yeah.
You know, that's that's like you miss just life back home.
Mm-hmm.
I think at the beginning, of course, there's going to be a bunch of like difficulties with speaking to people or navigating through the town, like you just getting the lay of the land and understanding how things work. But I think that phase passes after like a month or two. But then the homesickness starts to creep in a little bit,
Yeah.
especially the more isolated you are. Um, a lot of my friends, a lot of the Jets were actually placed in really, 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 really remote towns with like 200, 300 people. And it was like a 2-hour drive to like the nearest slightly larger town. So, I can only imagine for them how much more challenging it was.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, but I think, everybody who comes here, they kind of, you know, especially in 2019, you can pretty much get everything that you miss from back home. You can order stuff on Amazon. There's
Yeah.
there's a lot of Costco's kind of relatively nearby if you're willing to make the trip. So you can get the things that you miss from back home with a little bit of effort. But like you can't always bring like your friends or your family or your like your mom or your dad or be
For
able to see
sure.
them. Of course we have like Hangouts and Skype and social media, but
This ain't the
it's
same.
uh it's because like life kind of passes. Like
Mm-hmm.
you're living your life in this country, and life back home like keeps going. Like it doesn't stop.
Yeah.
And then so when you come back, often you come back and you're like, wow, things really changed.
Yeah. I feel
And
you.
like people's life path has kind of continued down like a different path than you might have thought. And
Mm-hmm.
because you're not in close contact with them, there's sometimes kind of a shock when you come back, and you're like, oh wow, like we're not the same people anymore. And sometimes there's a little bit of bittersweetness to that.
I definitely feel you there, man. So, did you know you were going to stick around there for the long term? Like, at what point did you know after the jet program was done that you were going to stay there longer?
So with Jet, you can actually do it for, well, depending on the location, depending on your placement, you can do it for between 3 to 5 years.
Mm-hmm.
Um, a lot of people go back for just 1 year if they find out it's not quite right for them.
Yeah.
For me personally, I thought I was going to stay for 2 to 3 years and come back and pursue a corporate life, like working in Toronto or something, right?
Yeah.
Um, but I think maybe somewhere around towards the end of the first year, I could see myself staying for several years more.
Mm-hmm.
And the second year passed, and the third year passed, and then fourth year passed, and I was like, okay, once I was like halfway into my third year, I could foresee myself staying for the full 5 years. And for most Jets, it's like, okay, well, what am I going to do after the 5 years? Like most people go back home. And for me, I started to realize I wanted to stay in Japan.
Mm-hmm.
And I felt like there was like a lot of unfinished business, especially since I had kind of really seriously started focusing on my YouTube channel.
Okay, so speaking of the YouTube channel, let's get right into that then. It's called DriftHunterAlbo. As I mentioned earlier, 150,000 subscribers, almost 7.5 million views, which is crazy. And we'll get into your reactions on the success of it so far. But let's talk about the history of this channel. Let's talk about your interest in cars. Were you always interested in cars?
Yeah, I mean, growing up, my dad had, well, I used to live in Saudi Arabia,
Did you? I didn't know that.
and
Wow.
yeah, it was a strange childhood. I lived there for 10 years,
Wow.
and like one of the things that my dad would subscribe to or would get to kind of stay, how can I say, like stay attuned to Western culture
Mm-hmm.
would be like car magazines. So I grew up reading Road and Track and Motor Trend and all these what's it called, car magazines.
Yep.
And then playing PlayStation, getting a PlayStation, I would get really into
Gran
Gran
Turismo.
Turismo and Need for
Yeah.
Speed. Yep,
Mm-hmm.
yep, of course. And then like in high school, everybody was into the Initial D arcade game,
Yeah.
and
And for
yeah.
those
So
who
I mean, like,
don't, yeah, for those, sorry,
I
just
love
gonna, for those who don't know what Initial D is, it's basically this cult racing game that so many of us used to play, and it was like a full console at the arcade games where you can actually sit in and you could have like an Initial D card, where like everywhere
right,
you go,
right,
you
right.
could put this card in, race with your card that you've designed, and with your guy, with your record and everything, and you can race other people. So it got extremely popular, especially amongst
Right.
the Asian community.
Yep.
So
Yep. Yep.
yeah. So sorry. Go ahead.
Yeah. No, no, no. Yeah, yeah, you're right. It was like this huge phenomenon to rival like DDR,
Mm-hmm.
and
One of those
like, oh
two.
man, memories.
Yeah,
Yeah,
for
I
sure.
was really into both of those.
Really? Yeah.
And but yeah, I mean, I think that's probably one of the sparks of my love of well, Japanese cars. That, and of course the Fast and Furious and like the whole tuner culture.
Mm-hmm.
Like right around that time when we were like in high school and early years of university, like there was a really kind of burgeoning like tuner culture.
Mm-hmm.
And for me, like I never had the opportunity to have my own car back in high school. Just drive my family's minivan and Mazda 3, drive that around.
Mm-hmm.
And so I'd always thought, okay, one day I want to drive or I want to own a sports car.
Mm-hmm.
And so when I came to Japan, actually, I was originally intending to buy this car. I don't know if of course listeners won't be able to see it, but I'm holding up a blue Subaru Impreza, right?
Mm-hmm.
GC8,
Mm-hmm.
two-door coupe. And actually, back in 2010, I had saved up about $5,000, and I was ready to buy one of these.
Mm-hmm.
I kind of picked it out. I would have to travel about four hours across the country to check it out. But a couple days before, I think 1 or 2 days before, my next door neighbor actually suggested that I give her black Mazda Miata
Mm-hmm.
a quick spin, just like this.
Yep.
And I took it for one drive down the road and fell in love with the fact that I could put the top down. I was like, this is the best thing ever.
Nice.
Plopped down $2,000, and I was like, it's no take backs, it's mine. And yeah, I think that's where the whole that's where like the channel kind of started, I guess.
Mm-hmm.
Actually, no, that's not quite right. So now my channel is mostly about Japanese underground car culture, and I'm also trying to incorporate other elements into that. But back then in 2010, I had originally started the channel to just show my friends and my family what life was like in Japan.
Mm-hmm.
And I would show like, okay, this is my Japanese apartment. This is the local supermarket. These are like our weekend adventures, like this kind of thing.
Mm-hmm.
And like the car stuff was kind of like my personal like passion, like my interest. And I didn't really realize that there was like this huge interest in that world. But kind of like slightly separate from the YouTube channel, which actually at the time wasn't really the main focus of like what I was doing. I was actually working on a blog, and my idea was that the YouTube channel would funnel viewership to the blog,
Mm-hmm.
kind of like passively.
Okay.
And I mean, what ended up happening was like the opposite, right? It's like the YouTube channel got bigger and bigger,
Mm-hmm.
and also at the time I had met a whole bunch or several other car enthusiasts who were also Jets. So there were about like 5 or 6 of us,
Mm-hmm.
and we had a club called the Gunma High Octane Club. Gunma being the place where I lived,
Yeah.
and High Octane Club because everybody except for me drove a car that required high octane.
Mm-hmm.
So I had somehow managed to sneak my way into this little group, and we would go for drives, basically up and down the local mountain passes, up and down the local toll gates.
Like the actual mountains that were in Initial D.
Yep. Yeah, the actual mountains. Which for people listening who are interested, you can Google them. It's not super hard to find. There's like Haruna, Akagi, Miyogi, which are in Gunma.
Uh-huh.
And then you have like the Usui Pass leading up from Gunma to Karuizawa and Nagano. And then you have, what else? Irohazaka over in Tochigi. And yeah, there's just a whole bunch of mountain passes, and they're all kind of unique. They're all really fun to drive. And yeah, so like driving around Japan kind of became my passion.
How crazy is that you actually ended up in Gunma? Do you think that if you didn't end up in Gunma to begin with, would all of this have happened?
Um, I think no matter where I would have been placed, I would have wanted to buy a sports car.
Mm-hmm.
Um, because the thing is, in Japan, they're so affordable. So I mean, my my Miata, like
Mm-hmm.
old car, right? But still runs great. It was in good condition. It cost me $2,000, and it was really cheap. And there are so many good mountain roads that it was almost a no brainer. So I was like, okay, where else am I going to have the opportunity to drive one of these awesome JDM cars in the land of the rising sun?
Mm-hmm.
I mean, like it's never going to happen again, right? I mean, like even if I were to go back home and buy like another sports car, like a newer 86 or like a 350Z or something,
Mm-hmm.
you know, like living in Toronto, it's just straight roads.
Yeah.
It's like a grid, right?
Yeah.
And
And there's
so it's
traffic
like,
cops everywhere too, so
yeah. So it's you know, I'm glad I had the foresight to get into like all this car stuff.
mm-hmm.
And I think no matter where I would have been placed, I would have picked up a car and started driving around like the local roads. It's just actually, it's interesting because sometimes I think it's not quite just random luck,
Mm-hmm.
and there's almost some weird like elements of like fate. I would even go so far as to say, because there's a bunch of stuff that has happened that's been like so ridiculous. I'm like, how does this even happen if this is not like, well, like kind of fate to kind of be working on this project? And yeah, it's a bit silly, but I just like to think about it like that.
No, I don't think that's silly at all, man. Like, are you a man of faith? Do you believe in God?
Yeah, I mean, I believe that there is a higher power. I think it's difficult to conceive exactly what that is actually like,
Mm-hmm.
but I think there's more to our daily experience than just what we see with our five senses when we are just like normally awake and sober. I'm really into. Hopefully in the future I'll get more of an opportunity to research and dive into like research and even personal experience with like psychedelics.
Mm.
But I've long suspected and just kind of like intuitively felt that like these medicines open up like a window into another element of reality that's
Mm-hmm.
not just kind of like your brain kind of making things up. So
Different,
I think
different.
there's definitely something there.
Let's talk about YouTube. So before you got into making videos, at right at the
Right.
beginning, what was your experience level with shooting and editing and YouTube in general?
So I would say that it wasn't that I had no idea around a camera. I
Mm-hmm.
mean, I was always really into the idea of filmmaking and trying to make movies.
Mm-hmm.
Back in high school, I actually spent an entire semester with a couple of my good friends to make a feature length movie about ninjas called Shinobi Saga, which hopefully will never see the light of day. Um, it's pretty embarrassing. Actually, I might just put it out there
You might
just
as
just
well.
because it's hilariously bad, right?
For your subscribers, yeah.
Yeah. I'll make it Patreon content or something. Yeah, the premise of this was me and my other best friend, these two ninjas, just chilling at home playing video games, and we realize there's no food in the fridge, so we go out and try to look for food. Can't find any, so we steal the wallet from an old lady. Steal a wallet from an old lady who turns out to be the the grandma of this really powerful ninja, and then we just run around the streets of Mississauga. Uh, Fighting because we used to all go to like the same kung fu school,
Mm.
and I think that's where kind of like my love of filmmaking kind of started. Like we would make like these funny, stupid short films, like kind of like we were really influenced by Hong Kong style action films,
Mm-hmm.
and
Love
we
those.
were always trying to make like Jackie Chan and
Mm-hmm.
like Donnie Yen and like those legends, right?
Yeah.
We wanted to make movies like what they were making someday. I thought someday I'm gonna get into stunts, and I used to be really into this sport called tricking, which is kind of like doing flips and kicks and kind of like acrobatics.
Yeah, yeah. I've seen some of your old stuff.
So
Yeah. You still do that?
yeah, I mean, I can still do a few. I can still throw down a little bit.
Mm-hmm.
But,
Backflips, you can still
these
backflip
bones are.
like no problem, right?
Oh yeah, I mean, like backflips something you never quite lose.
Okay.
But like the high kicks and stuff, it's like I got to be more warmed up. But yeah, I mean, like that mixed with filmmaking, like making movies about that, was really fun. So I always like to make movies about things I liked. So I think that combination is really, really good. And like, with YouTube, I think like when I got into it, like the idea of being a YouTuber wasn't really a thing. I had made the account back in like 2006. So like right when YouTube was like created, actually, right? And but I never really took it seriously as like a platform for being a creator or a YouTuber, so to speak. Because at the time, like none of us realized we'd become like this huge thing, right? Even by 2010, like it still wasn't apparent. Like there were still just people putting up stuff on YouTube, but there wasn't anybody who had really, 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 really blown up as like a globally famous YouTuber. Like I don't think that was a thing until like 2012. But I think like a little bit of that experience from these media classes in high school and just trying to shoot stuff with my friends, you kind of get a sense and understanding of how to use a camera. But then it's a whole different ballgame actually to take that filmmaking skill set. It's just one of the skill sets you need to be a YouTuber or a YouTube creator.
For sure. And are you editing yourself now too?
Yeah. So I edit everything, shoot everything, edit everything, or almost shoot everything. Like now I've got a small team, and we go out and shoot a lot of stuff together.
Nice.
But for the better part of the past 7 or 8 years, yeah, I just shot and edited everything myself, and it's just a learning experience, right? It's like you put something out, and it's probably going to be pretty shit, and then you're gonna put the next thing out, and it'll be either just as shit, or hopefully you learn something.
Hopefully you learn
maybe
something.
try, like hopefully, right?
Yeah.
Like you never know. It's like
Yeah.
like you go through like these long periods where you think you're putting out something amazing, and then when you look back on it years later, you're like, what was that? That was a disaster.
Oh yeah. That's where I'm at right now. My YouTube videos are trash. They're basically like how it looks right now, like me in front of a webcam. But I'm gonna get better though. I invested in some gears, so hopefully it gets a little bit better. I was gonna show a clip of your introductory video. So and just tell me a little bit about this video before I play it for the audience. But was this your first video that you created? It's the Inside the High Stakes one, like the one that has 2 million views.
Okay.
Yeah. So tell me a little bit about that video.
Okay, so I think this one is inside the high stakes world of man, I forget the name of the whole thing.
I have it right here. Inside the high stakes world of Tokyo's Loop Racers.
The Roulette
Suku. Yeah.
Right. Yeah. So I mean, that one was kind of how can I say? Like it took all the learnings from kind of years of making videos, and I would watch a lot of like Vice and a lot of like other like more professionally produced documentaries, and think, okay, what are these big platforms like Vice and like like National Geographic or what have you? How do they make their content incredibly engaging and fun to watch? And I try to take that idea and incorporate like, because if you just take like a TV style, it doesn't often map to YouTube and onto like that kind of platform. So there has to be like a mix where it still feels slightly natively YouTube, but it also has elements of like a more professionally produced work. And I would say like anything you see on TV, it might look really slick and professional, but you could probably accomplish that if you just Googled for like 5 hours and figured out how they do those effects and how they do like that kind of that production and just try to make something similar. You can get like 80% of the way there, I think. And yeah, so this one was kind of like, I didn't actually expect it to um, be as good as it turned out to be. It went through like a whole bunch of different edits, and I think just trying to look at other documentaries and incorporate cool ideas from those, it happened to come together really well.
That's awesome, man. Okay, so I'm gonna show the video. I'll let you know when it's done because you can't hear it or see it. But I'm gonna blow it big
Okay.
on the screen. I'll play about the first minute of it, which is just the introduction.
Okay.
And then I'll cut back and I'll let you know when it's done.
Okay. I'll watch it myself too.
Yeah. All right. So let me full screen this.
This is a chronicle of my personal experience exploring the underground car scenes of Japan. Follow my journey and discover the rich culture and history of street racing, drifting, and everything in between, here in the land of the rising sun. This is The Hunters. Since I moved to Tokyo, I've been exploring the underground car scene here more and more. While in Gunma, people race and drift 90s sports cars on the mountain roads. In Tokyo, the lack of toge and the high cost of living gave rise to a different type of street racing subculture. Racing on the Wangansen and Shitoko, the inner city highways of Tokyo. Here, it's all about exotics, big power, and pure speed. In this and future episodes, we'll dive into the history of the various street racing teams that inspired pop culture and meet the Ruretazoku, street racing tribes who gamble their lives on the highway loop. In this episode, I went with my good friends Norm and Andy to go visit Daikofuto, a parking area off the coast of Yokohama, which happens to be the mecca of Japanese car culture. We're here at Daikofuto. It's really, really busy, of course, because it's summer. And so hopefully there's going to be a nice range of different...
All right. I'll stop it right there and I'll let the audience watch the rest. But that was awesome, man. Just from watching that alone, I could tell how much attention to detail, and I can actually see what you're talking about now when you say that, you picked apart a documentary that you would see on Vice, like scene by scene, cut by cut, analyzed it, incorporated into this video. So I think that's a great thing that you did right there. The attention to detail. And so tell me, like, were you always kind of like that, like very great with attention to detail and like kind of perfectionist a little bit?
No, I wouldn't say so, actually. In fact, I'm kind of like the opposite. So I tend to kind of like throw different, like you should see my editing workflow. It's like, it's a total mess. But I think when you keep watching it and you keep iterating, like you notice things and you realize things, and often you only realize it after the fact, like after you already uploaded like a video. And then it becomes glaringly obvious, especially when you show it to somebody and you watch it alongside with them.
Yeah.
You're like, oh my God, okay, like this is too long. And so you get a really good sense of the correct timing and like when a cut should be, and like what kind of scenes are interesting. I think if you're too much of a perfectionist, it's actually bad, because then you get scared of putting things out. And that's definitely something that's happened with me. It's like, oh man, like I might as well just put another 5 hours into this or another 10 hours into this. And sooner or later, you've been working on this thing for like 3 months and you've barely made any progress, and you end up scrapping it because you're like, it's shit anyways. So like on some level, you have to put it out. And sometimes you have to put stakes against yourself to force yourself to release something. So what I mean by that is like one of my strategies is like I'll give a friend $100 and tell him, okay, I have until this date to release it, or you can keep it. And then
Deadlines.
Oftentimes that date passes, right? And then I'm like, oh shit. So I'll tell my friend, okay, I'll double the ante. I'll give you $200 and give me another 5 days, and then I'll definitely get it out. And then it gets finished, right?
Wow.
So you need to force those deadlines sometimes, especially when it's something that you're creating for yourself, like just your thing.
Yeah, for sure.
And there's no hard external deadline, like if at work or in your actual job, right?
Yeah.
And then I think like when I look at my videos now, it's glaringly obvious to me what what is wrong with like every scene, right? But for somebody just watching for the first time, they're like, it feels right. Like
Yeah.
they know everything that like if there's something wrong with it, they won't be able to explain it,
Yeah.
but I will. But then if I tell them what's wrong, they're like, oh yeah, that's right.
Yeah.
So like one of the things that I find helps me is to actually write down what I think is wrong with like the last video and refer to that when I'm making like the next video.
Uh-huh.
And so you kind of have like a list of pitfalls to avoid, and also like ideas that you realize that you should have implemented in the last video, and implement those in the next video. So yeah, I think it's really important to get those insights, because otherwise you can fall into the trap of just making the same thing over and over and not getting better. You always have to be striving to. For me, I'm always trying to make the best content of its kind on the internet, like to the best of my ability, at least, because there's just so much good stuff out there. Otherwise, your stuff will just kind of like fade into the noise. Basically, this is always my worry.
Wow. When did the channel catch fire, and before it caught fire and you got, you know, the bulk of your subscribers, was there ever a point where you were questioning whether or not you should continue on with this?
Oh yeah, so there's not a smooth upward trajectory. It's always like you middle along in like obscurity, and then one thing will like blow up, and you're like, oh man, this is it. I'm all right. This like 1 million subscribers, here I come, and then it peters off, and then you're like, oh fuck, okay, well, like how am I gonna top that? Like, you know, it's like, can I even, was I just lucky? And then you kind of go into like this weird depression. You kind of go back down, and then you release something else, which you think is going to blow up, and it doesn't. And then so you sink deeper into a depression. And then you release something else, which you don't think is going to be that great, but it'll at least keep things moving and keep things rolling. And then that blows up, and you're like, what the heck? Right. And then in retrospect, you have like, you understand why this other thing blew up, and you understand the similarities between the things that did well. And then hopefully you take those learnings and you incorporate them into like another video. And then if your observation was correct, then you'll have like a jump that you actually controlled. And then that kind of gives you confidence, and you're like, okay, if I keep making a similar video to this, like you kind of like uncover like a formula that seems to work. And then it creates like this is just my opinion, of course, but it creates, I think, like this virtuous circle where you then impact the algorithm to like your content, if that makes sense. Because you're putting out stuff that you know works and your audience responds to, which creates like this snowball effect. But for a new creator, it can be very, very difficult to break, like to get that first break, I guess you could say.
Break the ice, I guess.
To break through, break through the noise, like just a little bit, to like give yourself that initial confidence that like, okay, yes, like I can stand out. And I think that's really important. For a lot of creators, it just happens accidentally, actually, because like they put something out, they don't expect it to go huge, and it does. And then, you know, it's kind of like it wasn't really from their own efforts, if that makes sense. Whereas if
I've heard that before.
So I think for you as well, right? You're trying to make like this brand and this podcast and everything, and I'm sure you kind of feel it at some level as well. You're like, can I break through all the noise? And you need to have like a few of those like first successes to really encourage yourself to keep going. For me, one of the first big ones was, there was a couple actually. One of the first videos that really blew up was a video about clubbing in Tokyo.
I saw that.
Yeah, it's still one of like the most viewed videos on my channel. It's got like 1 million views or something. But it's basically, I just took my camera to one of like the hottest clubs in Tokyo, and just filmed like this like 4-minute snippet of like this is what the scene is like, right? And that blew up organically. And then released another video about like these dancing Elvis looking guys. Like they're called rockabillys, and every Saturday or Sunday they hang out at this park in Tokyo called Harajuku Park, and they basically they do this weird combination of dancing like from the 50s with like a mix of like break dancing. It's kind of bizarre. So that did quite well. And then I released what had happened actually was one of my friends in that car group, the Gunma High Octane Club, he was a drifter. It's quite hot. Let me open the window over here. He was a street drifter from South Africa, and he himself had kind of became a part of the Japanese underground car culture scene, and he had made friends and started going drifting. And one night he invited me to come out with him. So I came out, and I've told this story a bunch of times on previous podcasts. So if you guys are interested, come check out my podcast as well and look through some of the archives. But essentially, he had introduced me to like this world that I had kind of suspected existed, but when I saw it with my own eyes, I was like, this is the most insane thing I've ever seen. So I was like standing like here, right? We got to the spot. I was standing here. I got out of the car. I was standing here, and I heard like this super loud, like screeching of tires and the engine just like hitting the red line, hitting the limiter. And I see like the lights flash from like around the corner, and suddenly like your listeners won't see this, but viewers might, or viewers will see this. But I was like standing here, and suddenly this car comes around the bend, so close, like I could touch it.
Wow!
And like I happened to catch it on film, and it was like the most insane thing I'd ever seen in my life. Wow. And I was like at that exact moment, like it was so close, I could touch the hood, like 40 inches forward, and I would have been like a human crayon.
Jeez.
And it was like, this is the most insane thing I've ever seen in my life, right? And so I made a quick video of that experience. I uploaded it, and it actually, nobody really cared. Like nobody really saw it. It got maybe like 2,000 views or something, and I kind of forgotten about it. But as time went on, I had started working some other projects, and I realized, like, as I started driving more and more and more, because at the time I was kind of like a street racer. I was, I didn't take it as seriously as like the Japanese guys, but I would often go out and kind of go, like, racing on the mountain passes, and like if I saw somebody else, we would get into like a little bit of a battle. Like that's basically what it is, right? To be like a hashiriya or a street racer in Japan. And I was like, okay, this is really cool. Like more and more I realized like I had to make something substantial about it. So actually what I did was I just took that first video that I made, and I cut it up a little bit, and then I sent it into several blogs, and Kotaku picked it up, and they did like this feature article about that video, and overnight it got like 80,000 views.
Wow.
And like hundreds of people like commented on like the Reddit post that I had made, and like sent me DMs and emails and private messages, and they were like, dude, this is incredible, you have to please make something, like more videos about this world. And I had realized that like from talking to the other like Japanese guys, they explained to me that every year there's like less and less people, and like the scene seems to be like dying out, and like people just aren't interested in cars like they used to be. And I was like, oh man, there's like, this is disappearing, and there's nobody documenting any of this. And so I felt like there was this responsibility on my part as like literally the only foreigner some of the guys had ever seen to and like at that point I had befriended them, and like we were friends, we'd go driving and stuff. And I had started to explain like the idea of like, okay, like guys, I'm thinking about making this documentary, and they were really supportive. And And that's how the whole Drift Hunter thing started. I realized I had like this unique opportunity to make something that like to document a slice of history that otherwise might just vanish, and nobody would have known it existed.
Wow, that's quite the story, man. So, talk me through the feeling. Like, how did it feel when everything blew up, when you had those 80,000 views overnight and all those comments, your inbox blowing up and everything? Like, tell me what your emotions were at the time.
Part of it was mm, like on one hand, I was like, I knew it. I was like, this is obviously super cool, and I
Mm-hmm.
just needed, I needed, I knew that I needed. Um, how can I explain this? I was like, I knew that if I had just put it on YouTube and had trusted that the algorithm would figure things out and get that video to blow up, the likelihood of that happening was lower than if I put the effort to get somebody who had a larger platform
Mm,
and get them to feature it. Like there was a higher likelihood that it would blow up.
true.
Um, because I had shown like the earlier cuts to like several friends, and they're like, "This is insane! Like, this is super super good."
Mm-hmm.
And so I knew that if I could get somebody in a like higher position of power, I guess you could say, to see it, that they too might be like, "This is great." And so I just grinded really hard to get somebody to see it. And like once
Yeah.
I was able to get like that person on Kotaku to feature it, I was kind of like vindicated, and I was like, okay, I was right. So like for me, that was a big like confidence builder, because you know it's like one of the things that I was really really right about, and I
Mm,
kind of was able to see it through. On the flip side, I was working on a different project actually, which was called the Jet Coaster. You can still find a site called thejetcoaster.com, and essentially it is this website that teaches people how to come to Japan on the jet program, and to like how to live like a successful life in Japan, and execute their jet tenure with excellence, basically.
mm-hmm.
And so I was juggling like these two projects, right? And suddenly, like the jet coaster was like kind of swimming along. It was like it was growing. I had managed to grow it out into like a team of like 20 people. I brought a co-founder, and like we were even thinking about looking for investors. And suddenly, like the Drift Hunter thing, like really blew up, and I
Yeah.
was like, "Holy shit! Like, which one am I truly passionate about, right?"
Yeah.
And like even like now, you could say everything's kind of coming full circle.
Yeah.
But at the time, I had to make a call, and I had to make a decision, and that decision was actually like helped by the fact that I knew I was going to finish Jet after 5 years, and I had to um, figure something else out afterwards, and I probably wouldn't have the same interest for Jet program related projects.
Mm-hmm.
And so I decided to start focusing more on Drift Hunter, and because I had gotten that initial, like that really big breakout hit, I was really vindicated, and I felt like, okay, I can actually do something here. And so I actually I did like a crowdfunding campaign to raise like a little bit of money and awareness
Mm-hmm.
to buy a better camera, um, Sony A7S,
Mm-hmm.
which is really really good in low light. Because the thing about filming in the mountains is literally there's no light.
And you're in the
There's
dark, yeah.
only the light
Mm-hmm.
from the dark, the light from the dark. There's the light from the moon, the stars, and the headlights, and like
Mm.
that's about it.
That's it, yeah.
So like literally it's pitch black, because it's like this deserted um, mountain pass like in the middle of nowhere, and there's no, well, in some places there are street lights, but in like a lot of places I was filming, there were no lights.
Mm.
So we needed something that could actually capture what was happening, right? And yeah, it was just to see it kind of blow up more and more and more,
Mm-hmm.
was really awesome. And like as time went on, like all these other thoughts started running through my head, such as like, okay, I love this. This is I'm incredibly passionate about it.
Mm-hmm.
Where is this going? It's like what am I doing with my life, basically. And this was like, I was coming up on my 5th year of being on the JET program,
Yeah.
and I had to figure my shit out. I was like, okay, well, I can't just stay here in Japan and make YouTube videos, or could I, right?
Mm.
And I guess fast forward, you guys know the answer. But like that was a real crisis right there, because I was like, okay, the smart thing would be just to go home and find another bank job, right? And sometimes you gotta not go with what the smart thing is and go with like what your heart wants.
Yeah. That's incredible, man. Like I think you mentioned, like speaking on that, and it sounds to me that you had a lot of passion for what you're doing. So let's talk about a couple of traits, a couple of qualities that you think are essential to be a big YouTube star, or like a good YouTuber. So you mentioned earlier about analytics, because it seems to me like you're very analytical, right? So you analyze how you made these videos, you analyze how the documentaries are being done. So I noticed one thing about you tend to go back on that over and over again. So we'll talk about that. We also talk about grind, because obviously you're putting a lot of time and hours into this. So I'm sure that's a big quality that sets you apart from a lot of other people too, who don't have that drive to do this. And then you also mentioned passion. I'm a huge believer of passion. I think passion is one of those things that it's like a kick in the ass, but then it'll literally keep on motivating you forever. It's a fulfilling motivation, in my opinion. So aside from these, and we'll speak about these too, are there any other qualities that you think that you have, or do you think that would be essential for a successful YouTuber?
I think anybody can be a YouTuber. But what I mean by that is, like, if you have a phone and you have an internet connection, you could literally start filming yourself. You could film your day. You could start filming somebody cooking. Like, okay, like for example, like one of the channels I stumbled upon just yesterday or 2 days ago was this channel where somebody literally just films like people cutting steak or cooking steak. And like this channel has like several million subscribers, and like that particular video had like 42 million views.
Wow.
Right? So when you think about it like that, it's like anybody can start, but I think what separates people, successful people, it's just like most people will stop, and like I would say like 90% of people who start a project will stop.
Yeah.
Especially if it's like a personal like passion project like this, right? And like there's a bunch of reasons for that, and I think one of the reasons is because it's easy to say that you're grinding and you're passionate and you're hustling when you want to do it, but it's kind of like going to the gym and going when you don't want to.
Yeah.
It's like it's great to be like, yeah, I'm motivated, like let's kill it at the gym, and like on good days when you're pumped to go to the gym, like that's great, but that's actually not can't talk. Those are not actually the moments that matter. The moments that matter are like when you feel like shit and you really don't want to do it, but you do it anyway.
Yeah.
That's a choice, right? That's always like a choice. And I think one of the really important traits that to develop is to like, is it even I guess like it's like self-awareness, like
Yeah. Okay.
like understanding that at every moment you have a choice to do the hard thing or to do the easy thing. And if you can start building the skill, I guess it's a skill, it's like more like a muscle of choosing hard options.
It's like a mindset, I guess, right?
Yeah, it's a mindset. And there's a really good quote. I forget who says, I'm terrible at attribution, but one of my favorite quotes is like, hard choices, easy life. Easy choices, hard life. Right? So if you make the hard choice, you'll have like a happy, easy life. If you make easy choices, you're gonna have like a harder life. life. So it's like,
In the end, yeah, for sure.
yeah, like so you have to make like
Like a choice, like a conscious effort.
yeah, like you have to make a conscious effort. Like I mean, it's I think about this a lot actually. Like this is like one of the things I think about the most. And like
Mm.
and the reason why is because like looking back, I could see all these moments where I'm like on the verge of quitting,
Mm-hmm.
but I didn't. And I'm lucky I had those moments to look back on, because now as things have gained momentum, as things have kept building up, there are always still those moments where I'm like, ah, okay, well, is this worth it? Should I keep this going? But I look back and in previous instances, I didn't quit. So that gives me the like motivation and encouragement and courage to keep going. So I don't know. I'm like
That in itself is a
I'm not
powerful
sure.
message. That's a very
Mhm.
powerful message for sure. Including what you mentioned earlier about deadlines too. You know, setting those deadlines for yourself and having that hard work, choosing that harder path as well, combining it with passion. It's to me, it just seems like that's the recipe for success.
Yeah, there's definitely there's a recipe, and I think like working hard is just one component of it,
Yeah,
and not quitting is just one component of it, and choosing the right damn thing is one component of it,
yeah.
right? There's a lot of different factors that go into success, but I would say like if there was one that was the most important, it's just like not quitting,
Mm-hmm.
because it's like you have to realize that like it's easy to compare yourself to like all these other successful YouTubers, and
Yeah,
it's a very dangerous trap to compare, or not even just YouTuber, anybody who's successful, and see like, oh, they did it in this short amount of time. Um, that's extremely dangerous, because not only is success extremely uh, like success beyond just the mediocre level of success of like like most people end up achieving. Um, any kind of like great success or accomplishment or anything, it's there's very few people who manage to accomplish that, and then there's an even smaller percentage of people who manage to accomplish it in a very impressive amount of time.
mm-hmm.
Like most of the time it'll take you like 3 years, 5 years, 10 years, 20 years, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I think it's important to ask yourself, it's like, are you willing to work on this for 5 years or 10 years, right? Like, so I think it's important to kind of sit down and kind of map out like where you see your life,
Mm-hmm.
and not just like the best case scenario where it's like, okay, in 10 years I want to be this successful. Okay,
Yeah.
what if you're not? Like, what if in 10 years you're still where you are? Can you handle that? Like, will you be okay with that? So I think you always have to be constantly self-reflecting, and um so maybe that is a really important trait, like just like being able to self-reflect honestly, and to look at yourself honestly and ask yourself like these questions, and like and really answer them, instead of just like kind of passing them over in your head, being like, yeah, it'll work out, it'll be fine. um
It's a very
yeah.
powerful message, man. What about it's related to your self belief and not quitting, but your level of self belief. How can you describe your level of self belief throughout this whole thing?
Yeah, I mean, it definitely ebbs and flows, it goes up and down. Like if you compare, it's I think like the big trap is comparing yourself to other people.
The compare,
So
yeah,
just
comparison
like you
trap,
don't
yeah,
do that. You just compare yourself. Yeah, yeah, it's this horrible trap. So you just need to compare yourself to who you were yesterday, which is
mm,
like it's easy to say, it's hard to do, right? Because like you're constantly surrounded, like especially on your Instagram feed, you scroll and you're like, oh man, this person's killing it. Especially if they're like your somebody you kind of grew up with. You're like, oh man, they're really killing it, right? It's like, what am I doing with my life? And it's like I think one of the main themes of your podcast is all about gratitude,
mm-hmm,
right? um having that gratitude to know that you're just lucky to be able to have this chance to play this game,
mm-hmm,
and like you have your wits about you, you can walk, you can do stuff, you can write, you can create, you have opportunity. We live in Canada. You live in Canada. I live in Japan. You live in first world countries. We have computers. We're listening to this podcast right now. There's all this. These are all opportunities that we're taking advantage of, right? And I think when you start to look at life from that perspective, when you frame it in such a way that you look at like, okay, well, things might be shitty, but in the grand scheme of things, like things are like I have a pretty sweet life.
Yeah.
Then you can kind of like keep going, like especially like when you start self-analyzing, like, okay, what do you really need? And you start cutting things out that you don't really need, that things that are holding you back. Like all that stuff goes like a long way towards like not just like building your self-belief and your self-confidence, but that like because it's not just belief in yourself, it's also belief that you can do it, which is kind of similar, kind of different, if that makes sense, because like you might believe in yourself that you can do it, but you might believe that the likelihood is low. So you need to have both a belief that you can accomplish your goals, and that there's a realistic likelihood that you can pull it off. And as time goes on, you keep assessing both of those. Like you keep assessing like, yeah, I can do this, and then yeah, this is a realistic goal to shoot for, or like you can move it, right? You can re-establish your goals. Like it doesn't have to be like this thing that looms over you, and if you don't accomplish it, you're gonna feel like shit. So like I think as cliche as it sounds, like it's really all about just going on that journey, because you're never gonna know exactly where you're gonna end up, right? You can just keep moving forward to the best of your ability, and hopefully you end up somewhere you'll be proud of in retrospect.
For sure, man. Thank you for that, man. It's been an amazing show so far. I'm gonna have to cut off soon because we're just about over an hour now, but really powerful stuff, man, and I really appreciate it. Is there anything you'd like to plug before we sign off?
I guess if people are interested in like living in Japan, or just like life in Japan, and are into cars, my channel is basically the intersection of that. And I also try to talk about like motivational things, like the things we were just talking about. And through my personal experience kind of like living here in Japan, I hope a lot of people are inspired also to kind of chase their passions and do things that they really believe in, and things that they've always wanted to do, because that's kind of like how I've tried to live my life. And up till now, I've somehow managed to have a pretty good go at it. So I'm always like, okay, well, if I can do it, like you guys can do it too. And so hopefully if that kind of resonates with you, then you check out my content. You can find it, of course, on my podcast and on my YouTube channel and Instagram. I'm just trying to deliver that message, my version of it, in as many mediums as possible. So yeah, please just check out my YouTube channel, watch 1 or 2 videos and see if my content is right for you. And hopefully you can be a part of my community, and I'd love to have you.
All right. No, how do they say? Would they say arigato, Albo-san?
Yep.
Yeah.
Arigato gozaimasu. Yeah.
All right, man.
Thanks, man. This was really fun.
Hey, man, this was awesome, man. It was great catching up with you, man. So we'll definitely stay in touch for some further recordings in the future. And until then, man, just keep doing what you're doing. Keep killing it. And you're an inspiration to me, man. Just as someone who's getting into this scene and getting into creating videos and trying to make something of myself. It was really a pleasure for me to have you today.
Not at all. Thank you so much for taking the time.
Hey, no problem, man. Take care, man. Peace.
Thanks.